You have somewhere between a few words to a few lines of text to give a character description. Now, I'm not talking about the character introduction, what they're doing when we first meet your character. I'm talking about the words you use to craft the actual character description. And while the function of introducing a character is not new, in fact, novels and short stories have been using character introductions for a long time, the nature of how they function in a screenplay is a bit nuanced, and frankly, hard to do well. In fact, most new writers screw this one up. And when pressed, most aspiring screenwriters would say that character introductions are where we find out what the character looks like. And to a point, that's not wrong, but it's definitely not right. I mean, occasionally, yes, we find out what the character looks like, what they're wearing, how they're built, maybe that they have a big scar from ear to chin and a tattoo that says, "I love Taco Tuesday" on their arm. But that's a waste of words on the page. Here's something you have to understand right out of the gate. Character descriptions are all about storytelling. They are not about story. And practically what that means is character introductions are solely for the benefit of the reader. Now, you could take out the introductions and they do not impact the story itself, not at all, but they drastically impact the storytelling experience for the reader. And you're writing the story. You know how you feel about the character. You know if they're good or bad or shifty. And a character descriptions are all about helping the reader know how they're supposed to feel about the character that you're describing. You already know they don't. This is for their benefit. So compare these two character descriptions. Which one do you think is better? Higgins, mid-30s, slicked hair, leather jacket, looks like he never skips a day at the gym, saunters up to the counter, slaps a crumpled 20 on it. Or Higgins, mid-30s, saunters to the counter like he owns the place. He doesn't. Total poser. He'd be happier if he had even one single friend in the world. Slaps a crumpled 20 on the counter. Now, the first one, I know what hair, wardrobe, and makeup would have to do. I know Higgins is a big fella, but that's it. I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about him. But the second, I feel a little bad for him. He's pretending to be more important than he actually is. How he looks doesn't really matter, but how I feel about him matters a whole lot. That's what character descriptions should do. Help us know, help the reader know how to feel about the character. Now, maybe you can get those feelings across through things like clothing and hair choices, but not always. And you want to make sure that you're communicating the impression you want your reader to feel when they read the character description. And that's because the reader is looking for clues as to whether this character is someone they should like or not like, or trust or not trust, and you need to help them out. It doesn't mean you can't lie to the reader, so maybe you introduce a character as someone who seems like they're probably good, but they turn out to be bad. Okay, that's perfectly fine. But the reader needs some idea of how to feel about the character so they can properly contextualize that character within your story. And that's why it's okay to include what are called unfilmables in character descriptions. You get one, maybe two, but that's it. And they're there solely to help the reader know how they should feel about the character. Now, outside of that, in a character description, okay, that's up to you what you include. Maybe you do include things like hair, wardrobe, and makeup. It's fine to do so, but you don't have to. You should make the character's name in all caps when you write the description, and you should more than likely give them an age or an age range. And a good rule of thumb is any character over the age of 25, just give a range, late 20s, mid 40s, early 30s, that kind of thing. Under 25 though, give a specific age. I mean, there's a big difference between a 20-year-old and a 25-year-old. So avoid early 20s or late teens if you can. But what about including the race of the character? Well, here's the truth. Not what I wish it was, but what it actually is. If you don't include the race of the character at some point early on, the reader will assume that the character is white. Again, not what I wish it was, and things are changing, but that's just the reality. So if the race of the character is important to the story, you have three options. Option one, call out their race in the description. Higgins, mid-30s, Hispanic, saunters to the counter like he owns the place, he doesn't, etc. It's perfectly fine to do it this way. Option two, make sure their name implies their race. Clearly or otherwise imply their race. Javier, mid-30s, saunters to the counter like he owns the place. He doesn't, etc. You know, some names are more easily associated with other cultures and ethnicities, so find a good name, but avoid names that are overused or come off as stereotypical. Option 3, use their wardrobe to indicate their race. Now this one's a bit tricky and sometimes comes off as insensitive or stereotypical, so you have to be careful. You know, I personally tend to avoid this one, but I have seen it done in an acceptable manner, but I just personally tend to avoid it. And of course, you can use some combination if you think you aren't being clear enough.
Of course. Of course.
But there's one more thing you should do. Don't repeat information you're giving elsewhere. The screenwriting is all about economy, and you don't want to repeat any information that you're already communicating. So if a character is a doctor in a hospital, chances are they're dressed like a doctor. You don't have to tell the reader how they're dressed, that they're wearing a lab coat. You know, instead, maybe think about it like this. Imagine your character in a setting that they're naturally in. Identify all of the components, physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual, whatever, that people would generally assume to be true about that character in that setting. So a doctor in a hospital is probably going to be wearing a lab coat, probably has a stethoscope, but then don't include any of those things that you just listed in your character description. Instead, include the outliers, the stuff that doesn't seem to make sense, that gives us a better impression of the character. The fact that they're wearing flip-flops, that's just not right in a hospital. And if they're doing something like organizing the pencils by color, okay, then don't tell us in the description that also they like organization. Okay, you're repeating information. Don't do that. And as you write character descriptions, keep in mind that the more words you include in the description, the more important the reader is going to think that that character is to your story. So if you give a character a first and last name and 3 lines of description, the reader will assume that they are more important than the character that you just named Skippy, mid-40s. He only cares about chocolate. But the character descriptions are just the beginning of the journey with your characters in your screenplay. And a huge part of writing characters is their dialogue. And you can have a banging character description, but if the dialogue is bad, you're in trouble. So don't write bad dialogue, and this video will help you know how to avoid that. Please don't forget about all the fun buttons and the links below, and when you go to tell a story that matters. See you later.